Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
Hello and welcome to Finding Your Holy Grail, a show produced through Passionate World Talk Radio, whose goal is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. I would like to thank station manager Jeannie White and CEO Lillian Caldwell. I am your host, Dr. Mandy Simon. This podcast is not a medical show, so for advice, consult your healthcare provider. Today, I am joined in the studio with a very special guest, Mike Anthony. Mike, welcome. I'm so happy you're here.
Hello, Dr. Simon. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, wonderful. So you have written this book, Love Dad, How My Father Died, Then Told Me He Didn't. Now, it's a really provocative title. You have an incredible history. We've talked a lot about it. And I'd love for you to just give our listeners a little bit of background so we know where to start.
Sure. I always thought that I was going to be an actor. I went to college. Initially, I had planned to be a science teacher, a high school science teacher, and I was minoring in acting, in the background. And the science teacher would have been a nice fallback thing, just in case my acting career did not completely take off, into stratospheric levels. And then I ended up getting a master's degree in acting as well, accumulating a whole lot of debt in the process. Moved to New York City to do some acting, and that wasn't quite paying off those college tuition bills. So I took a job as a bartender on Broadway, which again I thought I'd just have for a few months until my success, my acting success came to fruition, and then I blinked, and 15 years later I was still behind that bar. But of course, I would not change a thing, as I now realize every step is a necessary one, and my life has been blessed by just amazing things. And then I wrote a book called Life at Hamilton, based on a lot of those experiences that I was having at Hamilton. And along the way, my dad shockingly died. He very young, completely devastating my family. And then some amazing things began to happen that entirely changed my life, my perspective on what reality is, and where my life was headed.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing this.
Yeah.
And your story is so compelling. And I think because you and me have set out to spend a little bit of time together, we may have to create other time to talk about all the things that you've done. But it's incredible. It's incredible to hear in your voice. I can feel from the words that you're saying, just in what I'm hearing you tell me, that this has turned out to be one of the most unexpected, incredible journeys of life from such a tragic start. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Things happen in your life sometimes that completely alter your direction, right? And it's like 1 minute you're living in one movie, and I was living in this sort of happy-go-lucky comedy, if I could, use those words, and then all of a sudden, in a split second, now I'm living in a horror movie when my dad died. It completely shattered me and caused this existential spiritual crisis, is what I would say. And it just happened like that. And sometimes things come into our lives, and I now realize that those happen for a reason, and it ended up bringing me to a place that I'm so thankful for.
Yeah, thank you. All of us have these experiences. And if we haven't had these experiences, we can say, you haven't had these experiences yet.
Yeah.
And this is one of the surest things about life, is that we get the lessons that teach us what it is that we're actually here to find out. And so you and I are, having this conversation, and I can feel that this is true for you. And I guess it would help our listeners to just understand, what is the short notice that you were given about your dad's death?
I was bartending at a comedy directed by Woody Allen. So Woody Allen is standing beside me in this crazy part of my life. And this phone call comes in, and it's my sister, and she's wailing, like making sounds I've never heard a person make before. She's saying, he's gone, he's gone, he's gone. And that's how I found out. My dad was only 60 years old, and he was a young 60, very active. He was a driver for FedEx, which is a very active job. And, we thought if anyone in our family was going to make it to 100 years old, it was going to be him. So when that phone call came in, it was just I don't know what the right words are, just an absolute out of the blue shock.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So this really sets the stage for what happens next for you in terms of this journey, because having that be such a shock, and I mean, because I'm American and I know Woody Allen's work so well, and I have a sense of the location where you were standing when all of this information came in, it just, I mean, the cognitive dissonance and the juxtaposition of everything, I'm sure took quite a lot of time to absorb, to settle into. Is this the reality of what I'm experiencing at the moment?
Very much so. So well said. Yeah. I mean, I have this clear memory. I hang up the phone, and intermission then happened. And you know what intermission is like on Broadway.
I do.
Suddenly you have hundreds of people who are, and it was a comedy. So the energy is all very high and people are laughing. Mm-hmm. And I have this clear memory. I'm making this woman a rum and Coke and saying, "Are you enjoying the show? How's the show?" Like it's any normal day. And then on the way to Grand Central, walking from the theater to Grand Central after the show, when I was, alone for the first time, I started to have my very first, but not last, panic attack. Mm-hmm. And that's when it started to set in. But the actual reality of the idea that my dad was no longer going to be there to pick up the phone if I dialed his number did not set in until a few days after the funeral, actually. Because, when all of that happens, there's so many logistics you have to take care of to suddenly put the services together. So I was driving back to New York City for the first time now, alone in my car. And I was being crushed by the thought that he was gone forever. As you and I spoke about earlier, back when I was going to be a science teacher, all of my lectures that my biology professors had given me over the years were suddenly ringing in my ears. And of course, those lectures, the bottom line was my dad was gone forever, because there is no such thing as anything disconnected from the brain. Consciousness is created by the brain, and when the brain stops functioning, that's the end of the thing that you thought of as your father or yourself or whoever it is that you lose. And I was in that car being crushed by those thoughts, and I started sobbing. And then something amazing happened, by the way. This song came on the radio. I won't tell the whole story. It's detailed in the book, but immediately something happened right then that was stunning. So yeah, it took a while for the, grief is different for every person. Obviously, it's a different process, and that's how it went for me.
Amazing. So let's talk about, get me from where we are right now to where it really became something you could never have imagined.
So not a few days after the funeral, most people are aware of mediumship, right? Which is this, the idea that some people have the ability to communicate in some way with people who are no longer in a body. Typically, we might think of John Edward in Crossing Over, or the Long Island medium. Now there's the Hollywood medium, the young guy who does this. And the claim is they get these messages, and then they transmit them, they translate them, and deliver them to us. Now, mediumship is something that I've been interested in and aware of just from those television shows. But given my love of science, interest in science, I was sure that if this was actually real, if there was evidence for mediumship, surely one of my professors would have said, right after teaching us about DNA and cell mitosis, they would have said, "Oh, and by the way, there's some evidence that some human brains are able to connect with consciousness that's no longer in a body anymore." And since no one had ever taught me that in college, I was sure that this couldn't possibly be actually real. But anyway, it's a thing that most people seek out, right? If you're grieving, you seek mediumship out. In my family's case, and where the story kicks off, really, mediumship entered our lives in that a complete stranger, a woman we'd never met, that my dad had never met, who is a medium, got in touch with my family to say, I have this guy here. His name's Robert. I think it's your dad. He's desperate to get a message to you that he's okay. This phone call came into my mom's house, delivering this message. And that's how mediumship entered our lives.
Yeah. Okay. So here we are. The phone call comes in. What were you thinking?
My mom got the call. And so she called me at work as soon as she hung up the phone. I was back, bartending. I was sitting behind the bar reading a book, desperately trying to not think about the fact that my dad wasn't here anymore. Just at that point in my life, I was just trying to hold it together because I was now in a complete crisis situation, psychologically, because my dad and I were incredibly close and he was such an amazing man. And if everything that he ever was, all of that love, all of his thoughts, his passion, his joys, if all of it could just disappear as though it had never been, as though it had been an almost instantaneous blip on the infinite radar of the universe, then I was really struggling with what the point to anything could be. I was having a hard time figuring out what the point of life at all could be. So that's where I was sitting behind the bar when this phone call came in from my mom saying, I think I just got a message from your father. And now my mom is also scientifically, she's a nurse. She's a registered nurse, has spent her whole life in the medical field. And her voice on this phone call was totally different. For the first time, there was some life back in her voice again. So she told me the story. And of course, obviously, with every fiber of my being, I wanted to believe that my father had somehow survived and contacted this stranger who lives in Arizona, by the way, had somehow contacted the stranger. Of course, I wanted to believe that. But the scientific part of my brain was not going to let me just have it. So by the end, to shorten the story, I ended up getting in contact with this woman, spent hours talking to her, grilling her about exactly what happened and why she thought it was my dad. She said some other things on the phone that day that I could not understand how she could know, supposed messages from my father. So that was incredible. I told my sister about the conversation, and of course she was intrigued. The next day, my sister is driving to work, and on the radio, there happens to be a segment with someone calling herself a professional evidential medium. And listeners are calling into the radio station, and she's giving readings. So my sister was stunned by the coincidence. We just had this stranger call the house, telling us she's a medium. Now there's this woman here in Connecticut who claims to be a professional medium doing this. My sister got in contact with her and set up a reading at our house. And I tested her by giving my dad a code word, basically talking to my dad completely privately, saying, I need you to deliver me this very specific message. And later that night he did. That it was so stunning of a moment. It's one of those moments where you kind of get cracked open.
Sure.
And, we were talking before about how there's this, you can, at one moment you're like living in this one movie, and then suddenly you're in this different movie. And that was another moment like that, where suddenly I was living in a movie where the possibility of my dad still being here was there again, so it took me out of that horror place that I had been in and now put me in this place of possibility. But again, I was going to need a lot more than that night. And I ended up deciding I wanted to make a documentary about this woman. Yep. And I called her one day and said, listen, I need to know if this is real or not. I need to know, frankly, if you're a con artist. And I would like to put you in front of a camera, turn it on, and then walk complete strangers into the room so that I'll know there's no way you could have Googled anything or hired private detectives to follow people. And I want to see if you can do what you did when I know you can't be cheating. And she immediately said, yes, I'll do that. And so I started making this documentary, and I've now done about 20 readings with this woman where, again, these are total strangers. They could be anyone in the world. I don't even tell the crew who's coming in that day. I'm the only one who knows.
Mm-hmm.
And to see her do what she does, I have some clips on my website for people so they can see exactly what the process was like. It's mikeanthony.com. You can go and watch some of what I'm talking about there. And I watched her change people's lives day after day, coming up with information that science says there's no way she could get.
Yeah. So this is, I so appreciate you did this so well, the way that you just uncracked the story for us and lined it up. It's quite beautiful. It's very simple to follow the way that you've explained it. So you've obviously done a lot of work for yourself to be able to get this story to line up, because I'm sure taking in all that information and going through. So this is a real paradigm shift. This is where we look at definitionally what it is that we think is true, because the conventional wisdom of the world tells us it is so, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so when we look at this, I mean, from my own work, I have a lot of patients who have had near-death experiences. I personally, my life partner, he's had a very significant near-death experience. And I had a 33-foot free fall rock climbing when I was in my early 20s. And though it wasn't this near-death experience, there were things that I recalled in my dreams after about how I positioned myself coming off the rock to fall in such a way that it wouldn't be crushing my skull, right? And I recognize now in retrospect that this is a really unusual circumstance to have a dream about consciously making a decision to turn your body in such a way during a fall to not have it be fatal, right?
Yeah.
And so, there are things that I love your story, because I know that so many listeners can connect with various aspects of this. Firstly, what it's like to lose a loved one. For those people who have lost a loved one so suddenly, and then to go through the grieving process, which we know is denial, anger, guilt, all these types of things, right? There's a huge amount that goes with that. And then waking up to the possibility that it's not true. And then asking ourselves this question of, well, sure, isn't this an interesting concept that perhaps consciousness doesn't die with the body? And this is where the whole thing just cracks open, because these are not questions that we typically ask in science when we write articles in journals. And yet, I mean, you and I were talking earlier today about the work of Mark Gober, who I'm definitely going to connect the two of you, because it's amazing, who is a person that I have been in contact with over the years and who I've done interviews with. And, his question is, what is the mind really? And this isn't a biological structure that exists in the body. And so when we start to have this conversation of the what if, I think each of us can take a moment to just reflect and hold up the proverbial mirror to recognize that we've all had these conversations with ourselves to say, what if this isn't exactly it?
Yeah. And what surprised me is learning how much strong evidence there is out there suggesting that this is not all that there is. I've long felt that there's much more going on. As much as I've loved science, I've always loved it from the time that I was a very young kid. I had a very deep sense that we are much more than our bodies, and that as amazing as the human intellect is and the things that we've been able to use science to do, I believe there are places that our scientific instruments might never be sensitive enough to reach. There's a level of reality. This is, again, I'm like an 11-year-old kid having these thoughts. I think there's like a level of reality that we're just maybe not meant to, for whatever reason, have complete access to. Maybe there's a reason for all of that. So, because as a kid, I would look out at the world, and I was a very sensitive child. I maybe a little bit empathic, meaning that I had real trouble if other children were making fun of another kid, for instance.
Mhm.
I was like, it crushed me to think about this other kid feeling bad, and the idea that he might go home like crying on the bus, like even right now when I say these words, like I could cry thinking about that notion, and I
Yeah.
couldn't understand, like, if there is a God, because of course I was asking my mom and dad, what is this? Where did all this come from? What is going on right now?
Yeah.
I couldn't figure it out. And my mom was like, well, God made it all. And I was like, well, why in the world, if you had all of that power, would you add the ingredient of a kid who wants to hurt another kid? Why would you add that? And I was so troubled by all of that stuff, that I think the coping mechanism was to think, there's got to be stuff that my brain, for whatever reason, can't have access to. There's got to be a reason why, if there is a God or universe, I don't like using the word God, whatever the forces that we want to use, the word we want to use, there's got to be a reason why my brain doesn't have access to these answers. So anyway, I'd always felt that there was more going on than meets the eye. When my dad passed and these things started to happen, and I started to do this research, it became so clear to me that there is definitely more going on than meets the eye. And I now know that without a doubt. The final chapter of the book covers that. I mean, I now know without a doubt that we are much more than our bodies. I just want to say one other thing quickly. It was funny you said about your rock fall. I fell off of a ladder when I was young, and I had the exact same experience where it was like time slowed down, and I remember turning my body in the correct way. So it was like a split second, but somehow like time slowed, and I was able to turn my body and just the right way to not get injured. So that's just an interesting parallel.
I love hearing this. I've never heard anyone say this to me. I do remember the emergency room doctor saying to me, "You should absolutely be dead."
Yeah.
And I thought to him, I thought to myself, just looking at him, I was like, okay. And to me, it was just, I could understand what he was saying, but I couldn't conceptualize. It's wonderful to hear you say this. And what I actually will share is that I went on to do my medical training. And when I first became a paramedic, before I did additional training beyond that, my very first emergency, everything went into slow motion. And so on the occasions where there is someone in front of me attempting to die, everything for me goes into slow motion. And I feel I have all the time in the world to be able to work through that problem. And I haven't really done any research on that phenomenon. I've just really appreciated that I get that opportunity.
Yeah.
Because it makes my life so much easier when things get dicey. So I guess we've discovered something that's really quite interesting and maybe requires a bit more unpacking. So thank you for sharing that. I really love this experience that you're sharing with the world about this story with your father, especially based on this retrospective analysis of this empathy that you felt as a child, and your question of why and how can this be. And one of the things that we really think about nowadays, which it seems a very simple concept, is that when the world is living in unison with nature, when they're living as nature, there is not a single person on the planet that would intentionally harm another individual. And so it is when we can really immerse ourselves as these heart-centered beings to understand that when we come from that place, these types of things don't actually have to exist. And although this is a little bit of a parallel to the conversation that we're having today, it will, for a lot of people who are listening, introduce an important bridge across the way, which I think is why I mention it. I love how you're talking about, this is real for me. This is absolutely true for me. So what would you say to the individuals who have maybe had not quite the level of detail and proof? I know that you worked with the doctors at UVA, for example, and this is an amazing amount of studies. One of the discussions I had with Mark Gober is just this aspect that you have children who come into the world who know how to play a piano without any lessons, or can come home to their mother and say, oh, I met, Uncle so-and-so today, and have the mother just say, you don't have an uncle. And then for them to go through these brain studies and to figure out that there is this connection. So just because we can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there. And one of the things that I often do with people that I'm working on transformational work with is I'll say to them, go out and count all the black Volkswagens that you see today. And the only thing that I'm doing is providing them a target to create awareness around something I want them to see. And it's shocking when they come back, and it's like before coronavirus, of course, they'll see, 100 black Volkswagens in a day. I didn't specify the make of, I didn't specify the model. I just specified the make. And then we can bring it down to the model, and then we can, so it is interesting. If we're not focusing on it, is it not there, or was it always there? And you understand the question.
Totally get you. Yeah. That's something that I think about all the time. And I've had lots of discussions about that, there's so much information. I in my opinion now, what the brain is a limiting device. That's like its function. Like right now, there's a bird that is chirping over here, right? And I did not hear it, but it's been chirping the whole time. It's only when you started to talk about this and I opened up my awareness for a second and I realized, oh my gosh, there's a bird chirping. My cat over here is cleaning her paw right now. All of this stuff has been going on the whole time. I was totally unaware of it until I brought my focus to it. So I think there really is something to the idea that the universe becomes what we focus on. And so it's really, really important. And people who have near-death experiences, I love that whole topic. But a lot of them come back with this sort of message that if we only knew the power that our thoughts, just our thoughts have, let alone our words and actions, if we were aware all the time of the power we contain, we would be so much more careful with our thoughts and our words and our actions. And, science is backing this up in a lot of ways. If we start to get into quantum physics, where we are on the cutting edge of things, Dean Radin, the Institute of Noetic Sciences that Mark, I believe you said, right? Yeah. Mark is a board member of. Yeah. They have done tons of experiments that in my mind, it's unequivocal. They have these things called random number generators, right? And if you get the person to focus on it, it spits out ones and zeros. And if you say, okay, get it to spit out more ones, you can do it just by thinking that. So, I think it's really an important thing to keep in mind. We are way more powerful than I think that we realize we are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the excitement and exuberance that you have around this tells me that you have seen some of the most and experienced some of the most extraordinary things that you could have ever had in your life. And it sounds to me like ever since you were a young boy, this is something that got to come in for you. I
now see that, the whole path makes sense to me. From being that little kid, when I just to tell a quick story again about that when I was little. So I was having all of this trouble with this pain that I was seeing in the world, and then seeing like war on the news where whole groups of adults, not kids, but adults are trying to murder each other like that. That I couldn't handle. And one night I go out to my yard and I'm laying on the ground it's a summer night and it's a starry night. And I say, okay, God, or whatever it is, the right word is, I got to know that you're there and that you're good. If I know that you're there and that you're good, I'll be able to accept all of this pain that I see, and I'll be able to accept that there's a reason for it that I can't yet grasp, that my young 10-year-old brain or whatever it was is too small in some way to grasp. But I got to know that you're there. I need you to give me a sign right now. And at that moment, this is a memory I bring back all the time. What I now know is a meteorite shot over my head. And it was so bright and loud. I feel like I could hear it like sizzle through the sky at the moment that I said that. And now when I look back at that moment and the way everything has gone, that faith that I once had, that shooting star, that meteorite gave me faith. And that's all that it was. There was nothing scientific about this. And I know the statistics about meteorites. And of course, I know what a scientist would say about how this is obviously just a coincidence. But what it did was give me a faith that got me through my life up to a point. When my dad died, that faith wasn't enough anymore. That faith was suddenly not holding me up anymore. And my dad, I now realize, knew that, and he was not going to let me sit in that dark place. And so then he started to do these other things that now gave me, it's not faith that I have anymore. Now it is a knowledge, it's a knowing, because it ended up going so far, the experiences. And again, it's the whole story is detailed in the book, but it ended up getting to the place where something happened that was unequivocal. It was objective. It happened. Everyone in the room saw and heard it happen. And so that's an incredible place to be. It's a very empowering place to be, to know, to know this stuff. And that information is out there for everyone. You mentioned UVA. If there are people out there who are wondering, where to start maybe with their research, look at the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, and the research into children who have memories of previous lives is so astounding. It'll blow your mind and I think your heart wide open. And that's when other stuff can start to get in.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I think one of the things that we always do on this show at the end is that we create a call to action. And I would love, not to put you on the spot, but do you have a call to action for the people at home that you would recommend for them in terms of this conversation?
The main thing, so life is this huge mystery, right? And being a human being takes an enormous amount of faith. It's a painful, difficult thing for a lot of people. It might be one of the hardest things in the universe. I'm now convinced there are lots of places we can choose to go, and that this is one of the harder ones. And that if you're a human being in a human body right now, I say pat yourself on the back for making this choice. To me, it means you're a grand soul and doing important work. So given all of the stuff that's out there and all of the infinite things we could talk about, the most important thing that I personally know in my life from my father and from lots of other places, and now especially people who have had NDEs again, just again to go back to the power that we each carry as a human being. Your kindness changes the world for people, literally. And if this is not a superpower, I don't know what is. If you're kind today to the person handing you your coffee at Starbucks, you change how the universe feels to someone. And then that has this ripple effect that we'll never be able to see the end of. So, some of the questions kind of fall away in your kindness. I think, if you're bringing this goodness to the world, you'll start having it reflected back to you. And some of the scary parts of the world get dimmer in the light of this stuff. So that's all that I would say. Just you're so much more powerful than you think you are, and you have the ability to change how the world feels to people, and that's an amazing thing.
It is an amazing thing, and I think I so appreciate that. And what comes to mind for me is this ability for us to stop and say, is this true for me? Right? Is it true for me that this is the world that I choose to create? Is this true for me that this is the world that I choose to live in like this? Because your point of kindness is so important. It's so important. And it goes back to this aspect that I was saying before, which is that if we approach our lives with actual pure love, like that 9-year-old who couldn't stand to see someone unleash pain on another person, this is the place that you're coming from.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. Tell us quickly how to look up your Netflix series, because this is amazing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's called Surviving Death on Netflix. It's based on the book Surviving Death by Leslie Kean, who is a phenomenal journalist, and she's the one who ended up giving me the experience that I had in England, and was sitting beside me when it happened, and she has written about it herself. So Surviving Death is that series.
Great. And then let's give them your website again and just spell Anthony for them so they have it. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It's MikeAnthony.com. That's MikeAnthony.com.
It has been an amazing pleasure to sit down and talk to you. I'm so grateful for this conversation. It's so incredible to get to know you, and your story is phenomenal. And I really appreciate you sharing it with us.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for doing what you're doing, especially in the position that you are in the medical field. That takes courage to speak about this stuff. And I think it's just so amazingly important what you're doing. And thank you for doing it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And before we go, I'd like to thank Passionate World Talk Radio for providing a platform on their internet radio station for our show, Finding Your Holy Grail. For more information, go to www.passionateworldtalkradio.com. To subscribe to our community, go to www.findingyourholygrail.com. Or if you want to talk to us and write into us about today's show, findingyourholygrail@gmail.com. I'm really, really happy that we all got together today. And until next week, keep well and stay brave.
Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the internet.